Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Tonight's session, bringing color and luminance or narrowband data together, and Josh Smith is going to present that. But as always, before we jump into that, I'm going to show off our image of the week, which goes to Andy Ermoli. And this is actually an older submission that we found, and it's a pretty cool galaxy, designated as ARP 188. So congrats, Andy. You're welcome to come on anytime and chat about this, preferably next week. But if you want, you can contact me. What are we? Contact at the astroimagingchannel.com, and you can get a hold of us. But thank you for submitting, guys. Keep submitting. And basically, I'm going to jump back over, try and click that window. That doesn't want to come up. And yeah, I'm going to hand it right back over to Josh. Josh, you there?
I am here. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Does it look like Photoshop?
Yes, it does.
Awesome. Okay. I am going to get started here. I'm going to start by just showing you guys kind of the final image that we're going to try to work towards tonight. And this one is a good example because this has both Loom, very strong luminance data, also very strong hydrogen alpha data, and then some really good colors in it as well. So what we're going to focus on a little bit is just start talking about the difference in the kind of data that we're going to bring together, and then also we're going to talk about ways that you can treat it to combine it. And as you can see, one thing that I really like to kind of try and focus on a lot is getting a lot of color in my stars here. You can see the stars have nice blues in them, nice yellows, some reds in some of them, and they kind of go across the spectrum. So one thing that you can find that's challenging when you're combining this data is that you're going to get, you know, not a lot of variety in the color of your stars if you're trying to bring in narrowband data. Also, if you're trying to bring in luminance to your colors, sometimes what you're going to do is blow out all your stars so you don't get a lot of color in them. So we want to talk about making sure that we're getting good color in the stars. We also want to talk about making sure that we're getting kind of nice, I guess, rich tones, you would say, and variations in the color in the image itself. So as you can see, even though I brought in HA and Loom, we still have kind of some nice bright like pink reds up here towards the top, and some of these regions that are pretty rich with the hydrogen alpha and the hydrogen beta, and then also in here where the Loom and some of that more dust is more prominent, you're going to get a little browner look to it. And then even in some of these hot spots and some of these star forming regions in here, you get kind of those bright hot pink areas too. And what we want to do is make sure that we're kind of taking advantage of all the data we have to make sure that we're highlighting all of that. And on top of it, you can still see that, and hopefully you can see, and it's not too pixelated in this one, that there's sort of this nice region of blue reflection stuff behind this pillar here. I believe this one's called the waterfall. And then even out in front of all of this, you can see that there is kind of like a very faint, and I guess diffuse blue nebula that kind of actually crosses this whole image up on the top. This pattern up here is just a diffraction spike from a star that was just out of the field of view, but you can see kind of that, I guess, pervasive blue stuff all the way up on the top here. And so that stuff is all actually coming from right around where M42 is. So if you were able to zoom out a little bit more on this field, then this bright star up here is the bright star in the corner of M42. So you know that kind of, I guess, diffuse blue stuff on the outside of M42, that's what's sort of coming in here. So we want to talk about ways to really just combine all of this to get together. So I'm going to show you a couple different images that I have that I'm going to work with, and we're not going to start from the very beginning. Maybe we'll do another episode soon where we actually talk about how to tone map stuff, because that's what I'm going to work with tonight, is some tone map data, and then also some just plain RGB data as well. So this is the luminance. This is a very stretched version of the luminance here, just coming straight out of PixInsight. You know, all it's had is basically just a background extraction and a good stretch on it. If we come down here to the HA, here's the HA data, and you can see how there's all kinds of a little more like kind of distinct structure in this image with the HA data. And let's come over to the RGB data here too. And so you can see this is actually really pretty dirty. If I zoom way in here, you can see there's still some good star colors and good variety in the star colors, but the data itself is very dirty, and it's not very bright right now. So our goal is going to be to work our way from those 3 frames up towards something like a frame where we have this, which is the color data just tone mapped on its own, and then moving our way from that to tone map. Let's see, this data right here, which just has the luminance in it, and also kind of plays some of that blue data up a little bit that we were talking about. And then finally working our way to the final image, again, which is this image here. So to start with, I want to talk a little bit about color data and how I like to process it in a way that it's good to, good and ready to bring bloom data into it or narrowband data into it. So, this is just basically a light stretch and just a little bit of saturation out of PixInsight and brought into Photoshop at this point. And I think a lot of people, and there's no right or wrong way to do this. Again, there's a lot of different ways. This is just how I've kind of developed a style that I like to do it. A lot of people, I think, are probably pretty particular in processing their data, even if it's color data, and trying to preserve details as they're processing it and getting it ready to bring together. And I've sort of just taken the opposite approach probably over the last 6 months or so, or a year, in my processing, and that is to really treat the color data as just that, a way to get color into your final image. And to get color into your final image, it does not need to be very bright, but you want real rich colors. The other thing that I want to do is make sure that when I'm bringing the color over or bringing luminosity to it, that I'm not getting a lot of like kind of color modeling in the background. So because of that, what I really do is I just completely manhandle the data at this point, and allow it to basically be destroyed. Just the color, not the luminance or the HA. So I'm just going to walk through a few of the steps of the thing that I do with the color first before I bring in the luminance to show you what I like to see out of it. So the color I want to be a little bit darker and a little bit richer, and we're not going to go through every single step in extreme detail, but what I do want to show you is just kind of where I get to for combining these. So you can make this quite a bit darker if you want. I just think I did like probably just a small STF in PixInsight before bringing it over here. And you can see that there's a lot of grain in here, and there's a good bit of kind of color blotching and stuff like that. And I personally like to just remove the stars from every image now and then bring them back in later. And the reasons are that I can get a lot more color out of them. I can get them to be a lot sharper if they're not stretched nearly as far, and they don't get blown out. So one of the first things I'll do once I get that just to a point where it's a little bit darker where I like it is I'll just remove all the stars. And for the color data, I'm not going to be careful about how I do it. So I can just do something like a dust and scratches filter, and I can apply a pretty heavy one on this. And so I'll bring this screen over here. I can, if you're doing a tone mapping on its own, you might want to do like kind of some small radiuses with some good masks and stuff like that. But with the color data, we're just not going to worry about that, because what we're trying to do is just get rid of pretty much most of the stars here all in one pass, just to make the work easier. So you see, if I can change the radius of this dust and scratches filter in Photoshop, and by bringing that radius up, you can get rid of more and more of the stars. And for anyone who's curious, this threshold thing is actually a way to make it have less of an impact on the bright areas. So you can see if I bring this threshold up, something down here like this keyhole, it still destroys it, but you can see the difference between sliding this threshold down all the way here, where it kind of just models everything out, and bringing it up. It basically protects more kind of brighter areas. We're not going to bring that up too high for this. We'll probably just bring that down to about somewhere around like 4 or 5, and basically that's just going to protect a little bit of this dust, and we're going to have this radius somewhere around 12. I see that Tolga says we are not seeing the settings. Does that mean you can't see the dust and scratches filter screen?
No, actually, we don't see dust and scratches filter.
Yeah, Josh, that's what I meant. Sorry.
Oh, okay. Let me see if, for some reason, let me try to make sure that I'm sharing enough of the screen.
Was that full screen mode?
No, but something changed since we've gone to gone over to YouTube. So I'm gonna just try and share my full screen on this screen over here, and see if that will help. So I'll go to your entire screen, screen 1. And now are you seeing that dust and scratch? Okay, all right, perfect. So yeah, something changed over there. So we'll just do this. Okay, so again, we have the dust and scratches filter. And I'm sorry, just so you guys can see, these are the sliders I was talking about with the radius. We're increasing that radius. You can see in the background that grid gets rid of more of the stars. Decreasing it gets rid of less of the stars. And moving this threshold up and down protects more and less of the data. So I usually keep that threshold pretty low here, maybe around like 4 or 5 or something like that. And I bring this radius up to somewhere around maybe 10 or 15. We might even go just a little bit higher. So the reason that we're doing this is all we're trying to get right now is sort of the really diffuse nebula color. When we come back later, we will take care of getting the stars and some of the more detailed color, but for now we're just trying to get some of this diffuse nebulous color. So this got rid of almost all the stars. There's a handful left that we want to get rid of. There's maybe like 10 or 15 on here. So what we'll do is create a new layer for this. And we're just going to clone stamp out all of these remaining stars. And so we'll just go through and do that real quick, and it shouldn't take too long because we got rid of most of them. And you can be a little more particular if you're doing this on your own, and you can use a little smaller circle and kind of get in there a little bit tighter around the stars if you want to, and you'll preserve a little bit more of the detail, but it's really just not that important for the color anyways, to preserve too much of that color detail. And so you can see we got rid of pretty much most of them up on the top already now. And we'll just get rid of these few down here on the bottom. One thing I'll point out is where you see something like this, which is a little hump of hydrogen alpha right here, you might want to protect that just a little bit more. So just be careful when you're stamping around that you don't totally destroy it. So we'll click out the remainder of these. I probably have about 10 more to go. And another thing that you'll see if we zoom in here a little bit as I get rid of these last few stars is kind of a little bit of a modeling here. That's sort of that orange peel effect that you might see from some people if they do too much noise reduction or too much of a blur whenever they're processing their images. And you kind of want to avoid that to some extent. And so what I like to do whenever I'm processing this color is I like to make sure I bring up the color as much as possible and as rich as possible in this color frame, because we can always back off of it with the Loom data, but I want to make sure there's enough that we can get everything we want in here. You can see I'm just clicking out just a couple more of these remnants in here. And like I said, we've done kind of some more thorough tone mapping episodes, and we'll do some more in the near future here where we go into a little more detail, especially like when you want to do it with Loom and HA and want to be more careful with it. But you can see now we have basically a starless image here. And so it's pretty dark right now, which is good. And the next thing I want to do when it's that dark, or or before I bring in anything like the Lume or the HA. So I really like to boost the colors a lot on this. Now, so there's a handful of different ways we can boost the colors. One of the easiest ways is to use match color. In Photoshop, if you go into PixInsight, you can use like your saturation adjustments under intensity transformations. And so you can see that I can just bring that slider all the way up to 200. Because it's pretty blurry already, we're not going to cause too many issues. But I may even add just a little more of a Gaussian blur and do one more of these. So when you apply this blur, what I'm trying to do is get rid of a little of this modeling and just make sure that it's very smooth down here. The noise that I like to keep in my images are just the noise from the Lume and the HA channels. So here we'll come up to maybe like a 7 or 8 pixel blur here. And then I may even bump up that color just one more time, just a little bit more. And so I think a lot of people may be surprised when they see kind of final images where the data might look partway through when you're processing. So as you can see, this looks just sort of like a kind of like a gross oil painting or something like that. So it's not a lot to it. Sometimes when you really boost that stuff a lot, you might start bringing out the green. A lot of times that green might come from the sky pollution or the light pollution. So I might, when I'm doing this, actually pay attention to make sure that I'm not bringing out too much of that green and do something about it. So, you know, a couple different things I can do are just reduce that opacity a little bit, or I can reduce where I'm bringing up the saturation boost. I can do that by just quickly kind of masking out some of this area with, you know, with a little bit of a mask. So if I did like a large feather there and said that I wanted to mask out that area, you could see that I wouldn't be bringing up that light pollution. So if I just hid that selection with this mask, you can see that kind of takes away some of that green. So there's a couple different ways you can do it. But in reality, it was already pretty colorful, but on these videos, sometimes it doesn't show quite as well. So I'm going kind of a little bit over the top on this. I'll just bring that slider down some. But essentially now you have what is your base color image without your stars ready to combine with your Lume or your HA. So there's a couple different ways you can go with this, but the way that that I'm going to bring this in is this is my Lume data, and this is tone map Lume data, and I did that with a similar process, but I used a lot of masks to make sure that I wasn't impacting any of the actual structure in any of the dust areas or any of the stars. And so I like to get an image that is a completely tone map color image first with luminosity and HA before I actually come into my into bringing my stars in. So there's a couple ways now to bring this tone map luminosity into this image. And so let me just get back to the one I was on here. And so just pasting that Lume right on top here, you can see, you know, there's a couple options, like I said, to actually bring that in. So one of them is actually just to apply it as a luminosity layer. And you can see right there, as soon as we change that layer blending mode to luminosity, it brings all those details right back in. And that's one of the things I'm going to try and hammer home as much as possible tonight, is that pretty much almost all of your structure and all these fine details and stuff come from your luminosity. So I'll come back up to normal again so that you can look at it and you can see what this structure looks like, and you can see what it looks like compared to the color structure. There's none there, as you can see. It's just completely blurred out. Now, different targets will react differently to this. Sometimes with stuff like galaxies, where you have a lot more kind of fine structure, you want to be a little more careful with how much you blur the data and stuff like that, because you're going to have smaller scale structures. But to see kind of the impact this have, I think is probably going to be pretty powerful for people to actually understand how you can treat color data and how much you can recover with some good luminosity. So again, one of the ways that you can bring this in is by calling it a luminosity layer. And you can see now, if you just do a plain luminosity like that, you actually get these sort of washed out colors. So we went from a color here that is pretty rich and kind of some nice like kind of pink colors and some nice blues and deeper colors to something that looks a little more salmony. And so there's a couple different things that cause that, and there's a couple different ways to deal with it. One of the main things that causes that is that there's a little bit of a mismatch in the intensity of your lume brightness compared to your actual color brightness. So if you see when I bring this in here with my color sampler tool, you can see kind of the brightness values here. That's 42, 33, 33 in that spot, and 44, 31, 29 here. And you can see if I apply this lume here like that, these intensity levels are much, much higher. And so when they're much higher like that, you're going to get what is essentially a little bit of a washed out look to it. So if we come in and change that again to luminosity, you can see that it still gets that washed out look. So let's look at a couple ways to make sure that we're not getting that washed out look. And you can do this if you have all the stars in there too, and I'll show you that real quickly afterwards. Same principles apply very much, whether you have the stars in or not. Same thing with being able to blur the data or not when you bring them together. So we'll go back and do that so that you can see that you don't have to tone map it to do that. But tone mapping it in this case is just really going to kind of help drive home some of these points to you guys. So like I said, there's a couple different ways to actually address this kind of washed out look. One of the easiest ones is to just sort of fit your data together before you actually combine them. And by fitting your data, you can actually do that just in PixInsight and fit your data, or you can kind of come in here and look at these intensity differences and adjust your histograms to kind of get them to match accordingly. And so one of the ways that you can do that is to actually just change the levels. But what you can see is that I think what I did before bringing this luminosity in is I applied STF and backed off of the STF and PixInsight. And when you do that, you're going to be pretty much clipping or close to clipping your black point over here. And so you don't really have much room to bring this left slider in and see. So if I bring this slider in and I zoom out, you can see the whole bottom of the image is going to be completely black. And we don't want to do that. That's no good. So you can see if I back out, there's still structure down there. As soon as I start bringing this over to the right, that structure starts disappearing, and that's no good. So when we bring the image in, you know, realistically, you kind of want that stuff to already be matching already. So the answer is going to be, instead of clipping the black point, is actually just to reduce the stretch on the lume a little bit. And you can see the more I reduce that, the richer these colors become again. So I'll zoom in here. These colors become just much, much richer. So you can see that. So that's one way to do it. I'm going to show you another way that I like in lab mode that I think helps a lot with matching these intensities, because sometimes I want that lume to be stretched a little more because I'm trying to get more of this kind of nebulous dust. You can see all this faint stuff out on top. And it took a lot of stretching to get that out on top. And this one was a particularly hard one because there's all that faint stuff on top. So another way you could do it is you could just apply a curves adjustment to it and just reduce that stretch in the STF a little bit. And you can see reducing that brings these kind of rich pinks back in here. So if I click that preview on and off, it goes from that kind of washed out, real bright pink to this dark one. But we're going to go to lab mode now and show you another way to do this in lab mode. So I'm going to put this back to a normal layer. And I'm going to actually make sure that I have this copied right now, which is our lume layer. I'm going to copy merge that. I'm going to duplicate this image right now and turn that duplicated image into a lab mode image. So we'll say for lab mode. And here's our for lab mode image. So we're going to delete this luminosity layer here, or the lume layer. So you can see here we're back to our kind of rich colors and very blurred thing here. And so in lab mode, you're going to come to channels. First we have to actually change it to lab mode. So to change it to lab mode, you come up to image, adjustment or mode, I'm sorry, and then lab mode. It's going to ask if you want to flatten it, and it's fine to flatten it here because we're not working with any of those other layers. And so these are the channels that you're presented with in lab mode here. And just to show you very quickly while we're in lab mode, how to work in it. When you come in, they're all going to be highlighted like this. If you want to work in lab mode, essentially you can click on the layer you want to work on, and then to see what you're doing while you're actually working on it, click on these eyes, on the eye up here on the top. And that way, when you want to do something to your image, you're only impacting that layer or that layer or that layer, but you can see how it impacts the overall image. And just briefly while we're in here, I'll also show you that you can change some of the saturation and colors just by increasing your contrast while you're actually in lab mode. So increasing your contrast on the B channel is going to bring up some of your cyans there a little bit. Increasing your contrast here on this A channel is going to bring up some of your kind of magentas and your red looking colors here. But the reason that we're in lab mode is actually because we want to replace this lightness layer. And if you remember, we copied this, which was our loom. And so what we're going to do on that, sorry, I'm kind of jumping around a little bit here. Let's go back to the one that we were working on for lab mode. What we're going to do is highlight this lightness channel right here, and then we're going to paste that luminosity layer onto this. And what you can see is a little bit different by using this lab mode is it actually uses that luminosity layer in a way that it's a little bit darker than just using luminosity in a regular blending layer on a regular RGB image. And so it helps preserve the colors a little bit. It gives you a little bit more richer, a little bit richer colors, and a little bit darker screen still. And so oftentimes what I'll do is actually bring it over to lab mode and do this, and then bring that image back over to my color image. So what I'm going to do is exactly that. So to actually bring it over, I just had lightness highlighted, but to actually copy this whole image as it is now, you need to click on this top lab channel here, and that highlights all of these. And then you want to copy that and bring that back over. So we'll do edit, copy, come back over to the image we're working on here, and I'm gonna paste this right on top here. Okay, so you can see this has some pretty nice rich colors in it. Just to show you the difference between lab mode and a regular luminosity layer right here, you can see by changing that to luminosity right here, you can see the difference in adding a luminosity layer in Photoshop and adding it as a lightness channel in lab mode. So I'll come in here a little bit closer, and you can just see the difference in the richness of the colors. And you can also see a little bit of the difference in the lightness of everything. So that a lot of times is my preferred method for actually combining them, is to do it in lab mode and then bring it back over here. So we're kind of in a fairly good spot here now, where we have our luminosity brought in to our color channel, and you can see, you know, one of the things we were worried about was losing those details with that very blurred image right here, but just bringing that luminosity and just really brings those details back very well for us. And you can see we're still getting the nice highlights in these star forming regions like we wanted. We're still getting these nice dust details right here, even up here on this nice little HA arc up on the top, which is very rich. You can see we're getting that. We're still getting these nice details in here. So again, like I said, I just really want to hammer home the point that ultimately you're getting your details from your luminosity, and your color data just doesn't necessarily have to be as good. You don't need quite as much of it. It doesn't have to be as detailed. So people ask sometimes if they can bin 2x2 with color, or if they can shoot it with a much wider angle. And the answer is yes. Now, you can run into some issues when you're combining your stars, but as far as your data, especially for nebula, there's no issue at all in bringing those together. So Adam, I'm going to pause for just a minute before moving on and see if there's any questions or anything.
I haven't seen any new questions pop up. I do just want to say, while you and I process slightly differently, our naming conventions are kind of similar. I saw possibly final version for Reels.
Yep.
That's definitely something I would consider doing. Actually, I think it was possibly final version for Reels 7.
Yeah.
Which that's very similar to the way I do it.
I process in my office sometimes, and a lot of times the sun is coming in here during the day, and so I think I'll think I'm done, and I'll just go away for a few hours and let the sun kind of go away from one window to the next window and look at it, and it looks way different on the computer. And then sometimes it might happen 6 or 7 times. You come back before you're ready for it.
Yep.
But
until it's really for Reels.
Until it's really for Reels. Yep, that's right. Sometimes it's the first time, sometimes it's the 30th time.
Exactly.
Okay, great. Well, so yeah, if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask them. And I hope I'm not moving too fast here. Like I said, I'm trying to kind of hammer home some ways to do this. And then we'll go back and do it with stars too, just to show that it can be done with stars in there as well once we get through this. I think we're about halfway through, so we're still in pretty good shape here.
This
yes.
is Eric. Can you bring up the color layer itself without going into lab mode? Because I notice your color layer is kind of dark. Can't you accomplish the same thing?
Can you explain what you're asking again? I'm sorry.
Well, your color layer is kind of dark. Can't you bring up the intensity and match the histograms a little bit with your luminosity and get a similar effect?
Let me show you that real quick here, just so that we can, what Eric is asking about, this is the lab mode one, and we're going to turn that off. And this is just the regular luminosity. So I think what you're asking essentially is, can we match the histograms here just by bringing up the color? And so we see right here that the luminosity layer, if we go to normal, we're sitting around 60, 50, and 100. So we want to try and hit something similar to that with the color. And just to do that, we'll bring up these levels. I'm going to move this over so that we can see these numbers. We said 60, 50, and 100 is what we want to hit here. And so you can see if I start trying to bring those up a lot like that, this is what this image ends up looking like.
So you don't have any room in the left part of that histogram, do you?
There's not a lot. And now the balance is a little bit different in these colors, but even bringing these up to 60 and 50, now let's come back in and put this luminosity on, like you were asking. Oops, wrong one. Do this one. Now it's still going to have a fairly similar effect to what you said, but it's going to be washed out. So it's not the same as bringing it over to lab mode. So you can't brighten the colors up to match the luminosity to kind of maintain those rich colors like that. The way that you could typically do it, if you have more room on that loom layer, would be just not to stretch that loom as much. And like I said, though, in this case, almost all of the data in this picture comes from the loom, and I really want to preserve some of this kind of faint dust that's coming out on top. I'm not sure if it's really easy to see on this one, but it's pretty prominent here. And so I did stretch this loom further than I might typically do. And a lot of times when I would bring that loom in, it would already be matched to the color. So you could even do a fit between the color and the loom before you even bring them together if you want. Now, I spend less time in PixInsight once I get going on these images than I think a lot of people do. So I typically would just do what I did, like I said, with the lab mode. But to answer your question, that kind of shows, what will happen if you stretch that color there and then bring that luminosity on top.
Does the same thing happen when you bring up the color itself without?
So this is bringing the color up here like that.
The color saturation?
Oh, you're talking about once we have this attached here? You mean bringing up the color saturation after we put the luminosity on it? Is that what you're asking?
Yes.
Okay, so if we do that and bring up the color saturation here, we can do that. So what we would need to do is make a new layer, but you'll still see what happens is that the image overall is going to be a little bit brighter. So if we pump this up, you can see that we're bringing some colors back into it. And we're pumping that way up. Now, part of what's happening when we're pumping that way up is that we're bringing some more artifacts back into it. So you can see kind of the splotchiness. But these color channels are still, they're all a lot higher. So I guess technically you might not be, but you're sort of losing some of the range of the image you have to work with. So if we bring this up to match something similar there, let me bring up this lab mode one. You can see it'll have a similar effect, but it has a little bit less of those artifacts in there that you're bringing by combining the loom and the color, and then bringing up that saturation like you were asking. So yes, you can do it the way you're saying, but then you're kind of stretching it further and further to get to that point, instead of taking something that's stretched a little bit less and already has that rich color. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm going to have to experiment with lab color.
Yeah, the lab color is really, to me, is very powerful, both for color adjustments and for combining luminance data. And I believe, if David's in the room, I believe that you can work the same way in PixInsight if you want to as well.
Yeah, absolutely. You can split your channels in lab mode and stuff like that and recombine. So you can replace the luminance channel with whatever you want.
Okay, and so that people realize that there are definitely, I guess, direct corollaries that you can do the same thing in PixInsight with this. And a lot of people don't even necessarily work on their channels separate. You know, a lot of people, I think, maybe work on their luminance and their RGB together, because you can work on the luminance directly in PixInsight, either the luminance or the lightness channel in lab mode. And maybe David does it that way when he works on his images. But that's also an option, is to do it that way. I personally just always kind of work on them differently and distinctly, just because I'm trying to get such different things out of them. But Eric, do you have any other questions before I move on to bringing in the HA?
No, I got to experiment with lab color for sure.
All right. So I'm going to go over to the tone mapped HA now and bring that in and show you at least one, if not a couple different ways to do that. So you can see this HA actually has a lot more texture, rich texture to it. And so we want to make sure that we're definitely bringing that in and also getting some good color out of it. So there's two different things that I'll do to bring that in. You can also see there's some real interesting kind of both star forming regions, some cool jets, a couple of cool wave fronts in here, and even that the keyhole is very prominent in the HA channel. And then we'll come up here and you can see some of this stuff, which is very cool. So we want to make sure when we bring in this HA that we're actually taking advantage both of the structure in here, as well as getting some color from the HA. You can see down here there's a lot more data down here than there was in the loom, so we want to make sure we're getting that and also getting some of these folds in. So this is an interesting image also, because if we look at both the loom and the HA, they both have some very defined structure to them and some very, I guess, different structure to them, which is not always the case. A lot of times your luminosity is going to be kind of dominated by your HA structure. And in this case, though, they're very, very different. So there's a couple different ways to bring them in, but one way we'll bring it in is sort of a similar way that we just brought in the luminosity. But before we do that, what I want to do is get some color out of this HA, because we spent a lot of time gathering this. This might be 25 or 30 hours worth of HA, and we want to make sure that we're not just getting structure, we're also getting a little color out of it. So I'm going to copy our HA here. Actually, let's make sure that this is, yep, it's in RGB mode. And we're going to go back over to the image that we're working on right here. And this is our luminosity image. I'm sorry, it's our color with a luminosity added to it. So what we're going to do is just make a new clean layer here. And we are going to make a new layer. And by doing that, we're going to come over to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and a Hue Saturation Layer. We're going to use the previous layer to create a clipping mask. And we can do this in normal or screen mode, and I'll show you the difference when we come in here and play around with it a little bit. and you can see what the difference will be when we actually change it between normal and screen mode. So we're going to come in and actually copy. I think that we had this copied already, but we're going to copy this HA, and we're going to go into this essentially mask here, and we're going to paste in our HA layer to this mask. So what we want to do now is click on this little box right here, and if we double click on this box, we're going to click on colorize, and we're going to boost the saturation a good bit. And you can see what's happening as we boost that saturation. We're bringing in a lot more of that red from the HA. You can see it kind of popping up down here on the bottom and popping up here on top, and it's a little bit richer. And you can actually, you have a lot of really nice fine controls in this kind of adjustment, hue and saturation layer. So it's a really nice way to actually be able to work on your image sort of in real time and see how bringing this channel in impacts stuff. And one thing that I'll say now is that I like a lot kind of what this HA is doing to some of the hydrogen alpha nebulosity, but I don't like as much what it's doing up here. So we can play around actually with masks on this too and do it in a different way. And another thing that I promised is that we'll show you the difference between screen mode and normal mode. So by doing a screen mode, what you're going to do is actually brighten the image up somewhat, doing it that way. And you can see it changing from that screen to normal. You're brightening it up. And you can change its lightness at the same time. And you see if you go all the way to light, you're going to blow it out, just kind of like you would expect with a screen mode. You're bringing everything up higher and getting it closer and closer to maxing out the histogram. So you can see that structure poking through here, but there's not a lot of color in it. So I want to right now just bring in the color and not so much of that structure. So I am going to go back to this normal mode. I'm going to make sure that saturation is up most of the way. You can change the color you're bringing into if you want to kind of have a little bit of a contrast or a different impact with your colors here. So you can come over here. You know, when you're bringing in narrowband or combining narrowband, there's no rules really. If you want to get more of a natural looking image, you might assign them to certain channels, but there's not really a lot of rules. So you know, this is a great way also to combine a couple different channels in narrowband if you want. You can actually bring these sliders around and see where you're actually bringing that color in. Now, I don't want to bring it in directly just on this red because it gives it, to me, a little bit too much of a cherry red look. So I'm going to bring it in just kind of at the tip of this magenta right before we get into this red region here. You can play with this slider to kind of try and get it up to where you want it, up and down. You can see how that impacts stuff. And maybe I don't need that saturation quite all the way up to 100, something like this. And then, so again, another thing I really like about Photoshop is there's just endless places to really kind of fine tune and adjust what you're doing here. And so I can change the opacity down here as well. But what I'm going to say is that what I really want to do is actually use that layer. Not only that, I want to use it as a mask to what I'm going to reveal for this color, because what I don't want to do is blow out all the color that we worked hard to bring in from our RGB channels. So what I'm going to do is actually come all the way back down here just to our RGB channel before we had our luminosity applied to it, where we're kind of a little bit darker right here. And I'll show you why I'm going to do this. So I'm going to select all and edit, copy, merged for this. And I'm going to turn everything back on. I'm going to create a layer mask for this hue saturation layer. And this is basically creating a double layer mask, I guess, because it's got the previous layer is a clipping layer. And then we're also going to bring in this mask here. And what I want to do is actually bring in color from that HA where we don't already have a good bit of color from the RGB. And the reason is because the RGB has the HA in it already, and it has some of this other color that we care about in it already, and I don't want to overrun that. So when I bring in this mask, the brighter areas in this mask are the areas of color that we've already revealed. And so I don't want those revealed, so I'm actually going to invert this mask. And now it looks pretty white. And so you're going to reveal almost the whole image. So what I'm going to do is stretch this mask a good bit so that we're not, like I said, overpowering a lot of the color that we worked so hard to bring in already. So you can just keep stretching this a lot here. There's different ways to stretch it a lot, but I'm just going to use the curves adjustment to stretch it. And you can see what's kind of nice down here where we didn't have a lot of color, and some of these regions up here where we didn't have a lot of color, we're bringing in a little bit of color. So I'm just going to stretch it a good bit like that. Do probably one more good powerful stretch on it. And anytime I use a mask like this where I'm trying to reveal stuff and it gets pretty blotchy like this, I'll usually put a good size blur on it to try and smooth out the impact of the mask. Something like that would be about right. Okay, so now we can come back in here and see what this is doing. And this is just what I was hoping to do. I was hoping to bring some color into some of these regions that didn't have a ton of color in them, and really enrich some of these really bright regions a little bit more, but not overrun that blue nebulosity. So here in this little folder with this mask is our HA color. And so that's what we talked about wanting to bring in, was bring that in just a little bit. And so the nice thing about the way that we brought this mask in, we can still work on both the color tone if we want. You can see I can move that tone around some. We can work on the saturation more or less if we want while we're still in here, and we can work on this lightness less and more. So this method really just gives you a good opportunity to keep kind of messing around with bringing that hydrogen alpha into your picture. So we already brought the loom in, got some nice details from the loom. Now we're trying to get a little bit of color out of this hydrogen alpha. And not only that, we also, I think, have we can change the opacity of this some too. So we can bring that up and down. So there's a lot of different ways to kind of mess around with what we're working on here. So I want some nice rich colors down there, which looks good. I want the saturation boosted pretty high, and that color looks just about right for me. And I may even brighten up this mask just a little bit, which would be pulling the slider back just a little bit here. And that'll actually let a little more of this through. And you can see as I brighten up this image, this image being the mask right here, I can let more and less of that through. So by brightening it up, I'm bringing in kind of just a little bit more. You can see up here, if I brighten it up, I'm bringing in a little more color up here, bringing in a little more color down here. And like I said, my goal was to kind of preserve some of this blue stuff in here and some of the kind of more natural looking stuff. So we're probably going to leave it somewhere right around here. So I feel pretty good about that. I'm pretty happy with where this is right now. And now what we want to do is get some good structure out of that HA. So we can do the same thing right now that we did already, which is bring this in as either a luminosity layer or bring it in as a lab mode loom color, or loom layer, lightness layer, I'm sorry. And so I can paste this on top right here as a luminosity, and you'll see what will happen is it completely changes the image. And because the HA has such different structure, you can see that all this stuff just kind of completely changed and disappeared. So we know right off the bat that we don't want to use this as a full luminosity layer, because if we do that, then we're going to get rid of all this stuff that we really liked. So again, there's two ways to deal with this, and we'll come over to lab mode to do this also. But we're going to do sort of a very similar effect here, which is come down this mask that we just created, copy this mask, which is blocking out some of our stronger portions already. And on this luminosity layer, we come in here and apply that same mask. Oops. Let's come in here, we have to select all for that and then edit, copy that mask. And then paste it in. Okay, so we can see that mask is right there. So now we can see what exactly that does for us. So let's turn this on and off. And this is doing just kind of almost exactly what we hoped it would do. And we can change this mask in here and look at it in real time again. So we can darken the mask, and you can see it lets less of that HA through as a luminosity layer, and lighten it up, and it'll let more through. And you can see that this kind of just gives us real-time control of how much of that we're actually letting through right there. So it'll impact the colors some, it'll impact the structures some. You can see if I blow this all the way out, we lose all of the structure up here. We lose a good bit of the structure in here, and it kind of gets a little bit dirty, and that's not what we want. But we also don't want to bring that all the way down and have no impact on it. So what we're trying to do, again, from that same mask is just reveal some of the areas where we didn't have any structure at all, and bring in some structure. So this is really nice to kind of bring this in here. We can see that we're getting a lot of structure in some of these folds down in this region where we didn't have anything, and getting a little bit more structure in these folds up here without changing the color too much. So maintaining a lot of this rich color, but also getting some of that. So another way that we can do that, again, is by bringing it to lab mode. So if we just duplicate this and call it for lab mode 2, so image duplicate, we're lab mode 2. Okay, what we're gonna do is turn off that layer, because that's the one that we just put on there. Go to image mode, lab mode, and we said it's okay to flatten it if it asks us to flatten it. But we'll come into these channels here, and let's come back to this layer here and actually delete this layer. So we didn't want that in there still. Come into these channels and replace this lightness mode. And I think we have a mask. Yeah, we have a mask on here that's having a little bit of an impact. I apologize about this. Sometimes this happens when we do this live here. Run into something that I haven't done before. This right here is why this is giving us this impact. So we're going to come all up here and create a fresh layer. And then copy our HA one more time to bring in. Come back to our for lab mode 2. And now we can paste our HA on here. And so you can see what that did right there. So I'll kind of toggle this on and off by redoing and undoing it. And so this is our lab mode. So we don't want to have that impact across everything. So what I told you before is make sure you click on lab here and select all, edit, copy that. And we want to bring that back over to the image that we're working on. We'll turn off that one and bring this in. And what we'll do is apply that same mask that we just created here. And you have to have the layer turned on, I'm sorry, to actually copy that mask. And then we'll put that same mask right into here. And so you can see that it's going to do a little bit of a similar thing. And what we should see when we talked about lab mode, lightness layers, is just a little bit of a richer color. So if I turn this off and on, you can see it just gives a little bit of a richer color. So this basically is sort of that color image that we talked about wanting to get to without stars at this point. You can do a couple tweaks here and there if you want, but realistically, you know, we took these handful of steps to go. You know, we'll go down and put everything in a folder that we used for applying our luminosity and our HA into our color here. And I think we have maybe 1 or 2 more layers before we get down there. There's luminosity. Here it is, that last color. So these are essentially all the steps that we took from this image, which is our color, and this is where we ended up with our color to get to this right here. And you can see, so we added a little color with the HA down in here and over here, maybe just a little bit up in the corner because it was so much stronger than the RGB there. But almost all of our other structure now has come in from our luminosity and our HA. So it's very powerful to be able to do this, to get more structure in here and to get some nice rich colors with your color data. If you try to just keep bumping up your saturation with your color data in there, it tends to bring out a lot more artifacts. And this image has very few, if almost any, artifacts in it. It's just a very fine grain throughout it, but with very deep and rich colors too. And it avoids some of that sometimes real salmon looking stuff, or real, I guess, kind of monochromatic looking color. And this really helps maintain a lot of kind of that, I guess, the richness and the different tonalities in the color. As you can see, kind of up here, we've got nice kind of rich pinks, some reds, some browns, kind of everywhere across, and it's really taking advantage of the most of the data in every place. So what we'll do is bring some stars in here in just a second, but I'm going to pause, Adam, and see if there's anything before I bring stars in.
The only thing somebody asked earlier, how much do you worry about having a monitor with a fairly high Adobe RGB percentage for astrophotography?
That's a good question, and I guess the way that I worry about colors and brightnesses on images is that I assume that people are going to be looking at these on all different kinds of screens that have all different brightnesses and contrasts on them. So the way I have my station set up at home is that I have a pretty bright monitor. I have a MacBook monitor. I have a little Dell laptop, and then I also have my iPad, my phone. And typically, what I will do is look at an image on 4 or 5 different devices and make sure on the brightest one it still looks good, and make sure on the darkest one it still looks good, and that it looks better, the best in the middle, and good on most of them, because I'm under the assumption that people who are viewing the images typically aren't going to have a very well calibrated monitor. So I guess I don't worry about that much, and I try to have screens at home that will kind of run the gamut from different brightnesses and saturations and contrast levels all over the place.
Gotcha.
Okay, cool. So we're getting there. So we have this tone mapped one, and I will bring in the stars, and I can do that pretty quickly for us. So what I'm going to do is put everything down to right where we started in one folder. And you can see that this folder, or this is the base image that we started with. This is where we're at now. This is the one that has our stars in it. So to bring in the stars, what I like to do is add the stars from the luminosity. I'm just going to close this one out here. I like to bring in the stars from the luminosity as my stars is, I guess, basically the mask and the luminosity that will bring them in. So let's come to the image we're working on here. I'm going to close some of these other ones that I just had up to show you guys, so that we have a little bit less jumping around now. And we'll close these couple for lab modes that we created. And here's our loom stretch. So our loom stretch here, this has all of our stars in it that we want to bring in. And I'm going to make a new layer on this luminosity, and I'm going to increase the contrast on it. And what I'm doing there is basically I'm going to start working on just creating a star mask. So I'm going to increase the contrast, decrease the brightness a little bit. And you can see that just basically makes these stars pop out. And what I'm going to do is actually even stretch these stars just a little bit more. We're in actually mono mode right now, so my curve is inverted. We'll change this over so it's not confusing to an RGB image. And so you can see what's going on here with the stars. They're getting brighter, and they're kind of getting isolated from the background. So I bring this brightness down and the contrast up, brightening the stars, reducing their halos, and this picture now looks almost like a star field. We're going to have a little bit of an issue here with the keyhole, which is a very unique target. This is probably one of the brightest targets in the sky, so in this case, we're probably going to mask this keyhole out, and we may mask out other really bright areas for different images, but in this particular image, it is an exceptionally bright target, so it's something that we'll kind of deal with on a case-by-case basis. But so what we're going to do is copy this, basically what looks like a star field from our regular Lume image, and we have some pretty bright stars in here and almost no background. And what we're going to do is come over to the image that we're working on, and we want to create a mode where we maintain what we had in there, but bring in these stars and the color from these stars. So we have this luminosity on here, right there. And what we want to do is bring in these stars right here, and especially their color. And so sometimes even though they already have a good bit of color, it doesn't hurt to even give them just a little bit more color here. So we might just even pump up the intensity a little bit more, just to make sure we're getting really good color on these stars. And might even put just a little bit of a blur in and pump it up just a little bit more here. And by a little bit of a blur, I might use a 2 or 3 pixel blur. And what that'll do is kind of fatten them up just a little bit as well, so that they'll fill out that fill out the core of the star with some good color in there. So we might even bump up the color just a tiny bit more before bringing that over. Okay, now these stars have some really good color in them. You can see the rich blues, yellows, kind of reds, oranges, just a little bit of everything here. So we want to copy this layer on here. And now what we want to do is bring this star mask that we created, and you could create that in Photoshop too, or whatever you want. And we're going to use that actually as a layer mask. And right there, you can see with those couple quick moves, we have what are some really nice kind of colorful stars popping through already. Now, it's going to cause a few artifacts that we don't want to see, and you can see a little bit of ringing around these that we don't want to see. And so there's a couple ways to deal with that. One of them right now, right off the bat, is we can use a screen mode. The screen mode can get rid of a lot of those artifacts and just bring it in brighter, but you lose some of the colors. Or we can use a, let's see, sorry, we can use this right here, our star mask, and there's a reason I kept that. We can use this as a screen right here. And the reason that we're going to do this is we're going to use these white stars here as part of our luminosity. So we put this in screen mode, but it brightened up our whole image, which we don't want to see. You can see it brightened up the whole image a little bit. So we're just going to darken it up just a little bit more here by pulling this slider over. And then we're going to take this layer right here, and we're going to use that as a luminosity layer for our colored stars. So we can get rid of this that we just made right here. So now we have basically white stars on top of our color image that we were very happy with. And this is what's going to be used as our luminosity. So here on top right now, we have our color stars. We come back up to normal, like that. Or we can use this layer as luminosity, and then this layer as color. So we can do that a couple different ways, and you can see the colors kind of pop right back in here. The way that the way that we did it right there gets rid of a lot of these artifacts, like the ringing around these stars. You can see the stars kind of jump out on their own. And one other way you can do this is if we have our color stars like this, is just to make multiple layers of this in screen mode. And it'll bring it in just a little bit at a time, a little bit more at a time. So you can see them kind of popping out a little bit more as we bring in multiple layers. So there's lots of different ways to bring these stars in. And we talked about actually masking off this really bright area. So you could do that by painting it or whatever you want. To actually kind of close off this area right here. So we probably don't want to bring those all in as screen modes because it's just really blowing out those stars. So we might bring these all in as normal modes and make sure that we're bringing lots of colors in. And that's the big thing, is making sure we have good colors on these stars. With these filters here too, we can come into these filters. If you're seeing too much of a halo, we can get rid of some of that halo by coming into here to a minimum filter. And this minimum filter will actually shrink our masks here that we're actually using to reveal these stars. And so that'll get rid of a lot of that halo that we have in there. So like I said, there's lots of options to bring these stars in once you're done. Using a screen mode and using some of these masks is really going to be the best way to make sure that you're bringing in the color and bringing in these nice kind of tight stars that don't have these halos around them. So Adam, I don't know if we have time real quick or not, just to show that you don't have to use tone map data to do this. If we do, I can do that in probably about 5 minutes real quick.
We have time if you have time.
Okay, so I'll go through and do that. And there's no questions before I go through and do that?
No questions, no.
Okay, all right. So what I want to do now is just fly through this last part, because I know that I think a lot of times people don't necessarily want to go through and do all that tone mapping, but I just want to show you real quick. I'm going to delete a lot of that stuff that we just did here, or actually just put it in a folder that we're going to hide. That we can do most of what we did without tone map data and probably get an image that's about 90–95% is good. But what we're going to have is some stars that are brighter, some cores that are blown out, and stuff like that, and maybe some mismatched kind of star sizes because we didn't tone map them. But here we have our base RGB image that's been color saturated a little bit. But so real quickly, what we're going to do is just bump up the saturation maybe 1 or 2 more times and bump up the blur on it just a little bit more, because this one we're not just using for star colors, but we're also using for the background nebulosity and making sure that that comes through. So we can do a Gaussian blur that's pretty large here, but what we want to make sure is that our blur isn't so large that we're getting rid of the colors in the stars, because if you go too large like this, you can see all the stars disappear. If you go just a little bit too large, the small stars disappear. So what we want to do is make sure that we are maintaining our stars in here still, which we have at this point. Looks like pretty much most of the stars are in here with that blur. So we can come in with our normal loom image like we had it. I'll probably darken this up just a little bit by bringing this over. Same thing we did before. We can just come in and you'll see that this gives almost the same image by just changing that to luminosity. Now it has a few more artifacts in it and the stars are larger, but we're still getting pretty similar quality. It's a little dirtier, not quite as clean by the way that we did it. You can see a little more of that kind of green artifact stuff. So we can change the opacity on this one where we really bumped up the saturation some and get rid of some of that green blotchiness. But you can see just by adding that loom layer as a luminosity right on top of our image right there, we're getting most of the way to what we just spent probably an hour doing. So as with a lot of things in processing, there's a way to do it that's pretty quick that gets you most of the way there, and there's a way to do it that's a lot more involved that takes a long time to do, but maybe gives you a 10–20% better image. So we'll just we'll actually also add this HA in and do the same thing with this HA real quick that we did before, just to show you that we can do the same thing by bringing in this HA as a luminosity layer. And we'll do the same thing we did before too, which is mask out these brighter regions by just copying the image before we brought in the luminosity or the HA. I'll change the HA to a luminosity layer and use this image that we wanted to invert like before. And part of the reason that inverting this is good at this point is that we're blocking out the HA from actually overrunning our stars too. So we'll just do kind of a couple of hard stretches like we did before again with that mask. And that's to make sure that we're just bringing in these same regions that we talked about, kind of down along the bottom and up here in these faint areas. And we'll still put that same blur on it that we put on before. Here we go. And so you can see, bring that HA, we brought these folds in down here, brought in a little bit more of these kind of structures over here, like that. And then we can even still do the same thing that we talked about, which is to bring in some color from that HA. So we want to bring in that color first. You'll see what's going to happen here is we're going to get a lot of red stars, but we'll still get that color from the HA. So we will do a new layer, adjustment layer with the hue and saturation. When you do this, you want to make sure you kind of have a basic kind of snapshot of where the image is first to use as your clipping layer. So we're going to put that in here. Sorry about that. Before actually adding this adjustment layer. Otherwise, we won't have a good snapshot of where we're at. So take this snapshot of where we're at before adding that color in, paste it on top, and then we'll put in our new adjustment layer. And use that layer that we just created as a clipping mask. And then let's bring this HA in again that we talked about. Same thing before, paste it in here. We'll colorize it, bump up the saturation. I'm gonna bring that hue back kind of up just under that magenta red region. Bring up the lightness a little bit. And then we also talked about using this same mask here to make sure that we're blocking out the parts that we don't want. So we'll put this into a folder and add that mask there. And you can see right there, we're bringing those same rich reds back in. So you can do all these steps just the same way as if we had stars or as if we didn't. You can see the stars are very rich and very colorful, but they're also much more blown out and much larger. And we have a little more noise in here. So you're getting most of the way there. Same exact steps, but you're just working with tone map data instead of non-tone map data, and it kind of shows the difference. But at the end of the day, we still come back down to the color image that we started with, which is just a kind of a big old blurb mess. And so again, that's kind of what we were getting at tonight, is talking about that you can really make your image by concentrating on your loom or your narrowband data and bring that in to be really the answer to getting your details, and just focus on getting the colors out of your color channels and not focus on getting any of the resolution out of it. So I think that pretty much covers everything I wanted to tonight, Adam. So I can stop one more time and see if there's any other questions or any other thoughts before ending it.
There are no other questions. I'll just say it's an amazing image. And where is that? At first I thought that was like the Fox-Fir Nebula.
This is right next to M42. So M42 is this diffraction effect right here that you're seeing. That's from the very bright star, I guess, on the on kind of the corner of M42. Gotcha.
And did you shoot that from your light polluted area?
No, this one I actually took from Okie Tex. Well, I shot. Let me take that back. I got the stars and the HA from home in my light pollution, and I got the luminosity. This was actually one of the images that I collaborated with my dad on out there. So we were able to get quite a bit of data in a hurry on this, especially the loom. And this one was just very cool, especially down here in the core, because there was so much different texture and structure between the loom and the HA. I mean, you can see all this kind of blue dust on top in reflection nebula, but then you also saw this structure from the HA. So there was a little bit of everything in there.
Yeah, definitely. And the combination of reflection and emission nebula just kind of makes it.
Yeah, so it was a cool image kind of to show bringing data together, because there was data from every channel and different ways to bring it in and have different effects on it. So able to kind of do a little bit of everything on this one, which also made it very fun to process. And these ones are cool too, because like this keyhole's still, we didn't really do a lot to preserve the resolution on this, but I did a super big close-up on this keyhole a while back that, you know, if you take a lot of short subs on something so bright like that, you can get something pretty cool out of it too.
Yep. Awesome. All right, well, thanks thanks again for another great presentation. I don't know if anyone in the room has any questions. I don't see any questions coming from chat, but if anyone in the room has them, call them out now. Okay, one popped up. Is there a way to have the host's video stream take up the full res with the thumbnail of participants? Yes, to answer your question, yes, and I must have forgot to set it up that way this evening. I will do it in the future. And RYD Gaze, I really need to try this method for SH2308. With PI, he's struggling to get that smooth background.
Well, you know, I'll post a method, kind of what we did with combining these with color for narrowbands. If you look for that this week, I'll post a quick video on that, because it's for people who don't use PixInsight, it's a cool way to kind of just have immediate feedback on how you're actually blending your color channels with narrowband, which I think is this time of year a big topic. And if there's much reaction to it, maybe we'll do an episode on that too.
Great.
Josh, this was great. This was very informative. In fact, as you were talking, I applied that lab channel work that you did to the ghost that I did last week.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's just another nice way to control things. And you know, we have a lot of conversations between PixInsight and Photoshop, and there's different methods for everyone to do different things, and whatever you're comfortable with is great. But I just prefer Photoshop because I think I'm a little more touch feel processor, and I like seeing things as I'm doing them, and like having just I guess very infinite control and very infinite resolution on seeing stuff immediately. So that's why I tend to play around in Photoshop more often.
Very cool. All right, guys. I will post next week's topics as soon as I come up with it, possibly midweek. If anyone has any ideas for topics or is willing to volunteer to present, drop me an email. Contact me on Google Plus or whichever way you like it. I believe our email is contact@theastroimagingchannel.com. I think that gets you to us.
Or Facebook. We get those, and we appreciate it. We've gotten a lot of good suggestions, and we'll definitely be doing some presentations on some of those suggestions over the last couple of weeks.
Yep. All right. Thanks again, Josh, and thank you all for coming. We will see you next week.